Welcome to Life Stories Network. Today, I want to share with you a story that changed my life forever. One that started with pain, humiliation, and loss, but ended with strength, resilience, and unimaginable success. I still remember the day of my mom's funeral. It was cold, gray, and heavy. Not just in the sky, but in my heart. I had spent days trying to hold myself together, not only because I had lost the most important person in my life, but also because I knew how my family would treat me. My sister Claire had always found ways to cut me down. She was the golden child, the one who was always praised, while I was dismissed as the disappointment. As I stood near the casket, wearing the only black suit I could afford at that time, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. My clothes weren't designer. They weren't polished. They weren't expensive. They were simple, modest, and clean. But in Claire's eyes, that was enough to make me her target. She leaned close, her voice just low enough so only I could hear. "You couldn't even dress properly for Mom's funeral? This is embarrassing." Her words stung like a knife. I clenched my fists and bit down the anger. This wasn't the place to fight. This wasn't the time to defend myself. Still, her laughter, quiet but sharp, cut through me like broken glass. I looked around and saw some relatives whispering. I didn't know if they were gossiping about me or simply mourning, but in that moment, I felt so small, like I didn't belong, even in my own family. It was supposed to be about honoring Mom, yet here I was, humiliated in front of everyone. But what Claire didn't know, what no one knew, was that the very thing she mocked me for was the foundation of the empire I had quietly built. My clothes weren't just clothes. They were pieces from the fashion line I had designed, the company I had nurtured in silence. At that point, the world hadn't connected me to it yet. But soon, they would. As I stood there, memories of my mom washed over me. She used to tell me, "Don't let anyone define your worth by what you wear, but if you love fashion, make it yours. Own it. Let it be your voice when no one listens." That was why I had started sketching designs late at night in a tiny apartment, using scraps of fabric, working 2 jobs just to keep my dream alive. My mom's words were stitched into every design, every piece, every thread. Claire had no idea that behind the scenes, investors had started backing me. Orders were flooding in. Celebrities were reaching out to wear my designs. The empire was already worth billions, and yet I had chosen to keep it private until the right moment. My simple suit wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a quiet crown of strength. The funeral ended, but her words stayed with me. On the ride home, I stared out the window, tears blurring my vision. Not just for Mom, but for the way life had always been. Me fighting to prove myself while Claire lived as if the world owed her respect. But for once, I didn't feel defeated. I felt fire. That night, I sat in my studio surrounded by sketches and samples. The sound of my sewing machine echoed in the room, steady like a heartbeat. I whispered to myself, "One day they'll see. One day they'll know who I really am." Months passed, and the world finally did. My brand exploded across social media, fashion magazines, and runways. The suit that Claire had mocked? People later begged for it. It became a symbol, a story of resilience, worn by influencers and celebrities who told the world they loved the message behind it. What she saw as embarrassment became a statement of power, and the numbers didn't lie. Within a year, the valuation crossed $2.4 billion. My designs weren't just clothes. They were voices for people who had been overlooked, silenced, or mocked, just like me. Every piece told a story, and customers connected with it. Then came the moment that I'll never forget. I was invited to a global fashion gala, the kind of event where my sister dreamed of being seen. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and when I walked in, people whispered my name with respect. It was surreal. I wore another simple suit, one of my own designs, and I smiled because I knew it wasn't the fabric that mattered, it was the journey. Claire was there too. She froze when she saw me step onto the red carpet. For the first time, the roles had reversed. She wasn't the one laughing. She was the one speechless, staring as the world praised the very person she had mocked. Later that night, she tried to approach me, her tone softer, almost desperate. "I didn't know. I didn't realize you were this." She waved her hand as if searching for the right word. Powerful, successful, respected? None of them crossed her lips. I looked her in the eyes and said, You never cared to know, but now you do. I walked away, not with anger, but with peace, because Mom had been right. Fashion wasn't just about clothes. It was about identity, about turning pain into power, about proving that no matter how people mocked you, your worth wasn't theirs to decide. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of Mom. I wished she had lived to see it, to see her child rise from the ashes of humiliation and grief into something greater. But I also knew she already did. She had always believed in me, even when no one else had. Claire's laughter at Mom's funeral used to haunt me, but now it fuels me. Every design I create carries the memory of that day, the sting of those words, and the strength I found because of them. The empire wasn't built in spite of her mockery, but because I refused to let it define me. And that's the lesson I want you to take from my story. No matter who mocks you, no matter how many times people try to humiliate you, your worth is not decided by their judgment. It's decided by what you choose to build, by how you turn pain into strength, and by the belief that your voice, no matter how small it feels, deserves to be heard, because one day, just like me, the world will listen. After that night at the gala, my life took on a rhythm I had never known before. Every day was a whirlwind of meetings, photo shoots, interviews, and fashion shows in cities I used to dream about. Paris, Milan, New York. I would sit in front row seats I once thought were reserved for people like Claire. And the cameras, the flashing lights, the endless questions, it all felt unreal. But deep down, I stayed grounded. I remembered that cold day at Mom's funeral, the sting of being laughed at. I carried it like a scar, not to hurt me, but to remind me never to forget where I came from. My empire wasn't built on privilege or handouts. It was built on late nights, unpaid bills, and silent tears. People saw the glamour now, but they didn't see me eating ramen noodles in a cramped apartment while sketching designs by candlelight when the power was cut off. And in those quiet moments, I often thought about Claire. I knew she was watching. Social media made sure of it. Every headline, every article that mentioned my name, every photo of me with celebrities, it was all right there for her to see. I imagined her scrolling, her jaw tightening, her pride swallowing like bitter medicine. She had spent years mocking me for being the failure, but now she couldn't escape the truth. One evening, after a runway show in London, I got a message. It was Claire. For the first time in years, she had reached out. Her words were short. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let her stew in the silence the same way she had left me to drown in hers. But something inside me, maybe Mom's voice, told me to at least hear her out. We met at a cafe, neutral ground. When she walked in, I could see the shift immediately. She wasn't the same sister who had laughed at me at Mom's funeral. Her eyes were heavy, her face drawn, her smile forced. She sat down and for a moment, there was only silence between us. Then she said, "I'm sorry." 2 words I had never expected from her. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to hear what she had to say without rescuing her from the weight of her own guilt. She continued, "I was cruel to you. I mocked you when you were struggling, and the truth is I was jealous. Mom loved you in a way I couldn't understand. You had her belief, her support, and I only had her expectations. When you showed up at the funeral in that suit, I saw it as weakness. I didn't know it was strength." Her words were raw, and for the first time I saw my sister stripped of her arrogance. I realized she wasn't just mocking me out of malice, she was mocking me out of her own insecurity. She had lived her life chasing validation while I had quietly built my own. Still, forgiveness doesn't come easily. I told her, "Claire, you don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to erase the pain you caused me. But I hear your apology, and maybe in time I'll believe it." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Over the next months, our relationship became complicated. She tried to reconnect, and I tried to let her, but there was always a wall between us. The scars of the past don't fade quickly, and trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Yet I couldn't deny that part of me wanted to rebuild, for Mom's sake, if nothing else. Meanwhile, the empire grew larger. I launched new lines that went beyond fashion, home decor, fragrances, even tech collaborations. Every move was strategic, every step deliberate. People often asked how I stayed focused. The answer was simple. I had already lived through humiliation and pain. Success wasn't about the money anymore. It was about honoring Mom's memory and proving to myself that I was worthy. One day I was invited to give a keynote speech at a global entrepreneurship summit. The hall was filled with thousands of people, and millions more would watch online. As I walked onto the stage, wearing another one of my own simple designs, I paused for a moment. I thought of Mom, of Claire, of the funeral. And then I told them about failure, about being laughed at, about standing at my mother's funeral and being mocked for the clothes I wore. And then I told them how that moment became the fuel that lit the fire within me. The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. When I finished, the applause was deafening. That speech went viral. People reached out from all over the world, sharing how they had been mocked, dismissed, humiliated, and how my story gave them hope. My inbox was flooded with letters from young designers, dreamers, and everyday people who felt invisible. They told me that if I could rise from that, they could too. That was the real success. Not the billions, not the fame, but the ability to inspire. And yet, behind the scenes, family drama lingered. Claire started calling more often. Sometimes it was small talk. Sometimes it was apologies wrapped in nervous laughter. Other times it was silence. She struggled with seeing me succeed while she stood in my shadow. And I understood. For years, it had been the other way around. But there was one moment that tested everything. She called me one night in tears. Her marriage was falling apart, her finances were in ruins, and she admitted she didn't know who to turn to. For the first time she needed me, the same brother she had once humiliated at Mom's funeral. I sat there, listening to her cry, feeling the irony of life press against my chest. I could have turned her away. I could have laughed, mocked her the way she had mocked me. But I didn't. Instead, I told her, "Claire, I'll help you. But not because of what you did or didn't do. I'll help you because Mom would have wanted me to." There was silence on the line, followed by quiet sobs. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Success isn't about revenge. It isn't about proving people wrong. It's about rising so high that you no longer need validation or vengeance. I had already won. Not because I built a $2.4 billion empire, but because I had healed enough to offer grace where I once only felt bitterness. That was the night I chose peace over pride. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The night I chose to help Claire, I realized the story wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about proving her wrong, or even about proving myself right. It was about something bigger: growth, healing, breaking cycles that had poisoned my family for years. I paid for her legal fees when her divorce got messy. I connected her with advisors who could help her get back on her feet financially. It wasn't easy for me. Every time I wrote a check or gave her advice, a part of me remembered her cruel laughter at Mom's funeral. That wound ran deep, but I kept reminding myself of Mom's words. Don't let hate eat you alive. Use love to rise. Over time, Claire started changing. She wasn't the arrogant sister who used to sneer at my clothes or compare herself to me. She was humbled, vulnerable, human. We had long conversations, not about wealth or status, but about our childhood, about how we both felt trapped in the roles our family gave us. She admitted that she was jealous, not just of my success, but of the bond I had with Mom. "She saw you," Claire said once, her voice trembling. "She really saw you. I spent my whole life trying to earn that, and I never could." Her honesty broke something inside me. For years I had believed she hated me, but maybe she didn't. Maybe she hated herself, and I was the mirror she couldn't stand to look at. The world, of course, only saw the glamorous parts of my journey. They saw me traveling in private jets, wearing my own designs, sitting with A-list celebrities. They didn't see me quietly meeting my sister for coffee, holding her hand when she cried, or driving with her late at night just to talk about Mom. They didn't see me choosing forgiveness again and again, even when my pride screamed at me to walk away. One year, on the anniversary of Mom's passing, Claire and I visited her grave together. It was the first time since the funeral that we stood side by side without bitterness between us. Claire placed a bouquet of white lilies on the grave and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I wasn't kind to him." "But I'll do better," I felt tears sting my eyes, not from anger, but from relief. For the first time, I believed her apology. For the first time, I felt like we weren't enemies bound by blood, but siblings bound by love, however messy it had been. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that success, at its core, means nothing if you can't share it. I had built a 2.4 billion fashion empire. I had traveled the world, signed deals, and seen my name in lights. But the greatest victory was standing there with Claire. Not as rivals, but as family. Years later, when people asked me to share my biggest achievement, I never pointed to the billions, the awards, or the magazine covers. I pointed to that moment. Because what good is an empire if your heart is still chained to old grudges? What good is power if you can't choose peace? Claire eventually found her own path again. She started working with me, not as a partner, but as someone who could use her strengths in areas I couldn't cover. She handled community outreach for the company, helping create mentorship programs for young designers from underprivileged backgrounds. Watching her pour her energy into lifting others up was something I never thought I'd see. And it made me proud. We weren't perfect. We still fought sometimes, still fell into old habits. But we had something we never had before. Understanding. Respect. The ability to sit across from each other and laugh. Really laugh without bitterness hiding in the corners. Looking back, I see the story clearly now. The funeral was the breaking point, the humiliation that sparked everything. But the empire wasn't built on revenge. It was built on resilience, on the lessons Mom gave me, and on the choice to forgive, even when forgiveness felt impossible. If I could talk to that younger version of myself, the one standing in that cold suit at Mom's funeral, feeling small and humiliated, I would tell him this. One day, this pain will turn into power. One day, the world will respect you, not for what you wear, but for what you create. And even the sister who mocked you will one day stand beside you, not as an enemy, but as someone who finally understands. I've learned that life isn't about avoiding humiliation. It's about deciding what to do with it. You can let it crush you, or you can use it to rise. I chose to rise. Now, whenever I step on a runway or launch a new collection, I think about all the people out there who have been mocked, belittled, or underestimated. I design for them. I tell my story for them, because I know what it feels like to be the one everyone whispers about, the one no one believes in. And I also know what it feels like to rise above it all. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever been laughed at or dismissed, hear me clearly. You are not what they say you are. Your worth isn't measured by their judgment. It's measured by your resilience, your choices, and the courage you find in the darkest moments. Because if I can turn mockery into a $2.4 billion empire, if I can turn humiliation into inspiration, then you can take whatever pain you're holding and transform it too. Not for revenge, not for validation, but for yourself. Mom's funeral will always be a scar on my heart, but it's also the seed that grew into everything I've become. And for that, I'm grateful. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder for anyone who feels small, forgotten, or mocked. You are capable of more than they can ever imagine. One day, the same people who laughed at you will have no choice but to respect you. And by then, you won't even need it, because you'll already know your worth. That's the real empire.